Very impressive. What is the key to longevity, Jahzo? How do you keep your job for so long?
Avoiding conflict. Just making sure your players don't hate you and that you get along and not super overbearing, and making sure you're just not the guy that people want to get rid of, you know?
That's nice. That's good advice. Don't if people like you, you'll get to stick around.
Exactly.
If they hate you, you're out the door. Nice. How have you been, man? How have you been? I know that we're even work aside. We'll get to all of G2 and everything happening in the games in a bit. But how have you been otherwise?
I've been good. Up in here, New York, team house. The weather's been getting colder. I like the cold weather, so that's been a real good vibe for me. Obviously, having to deal with work. The regional just finished, so a little bit more relaxed now. But outside of that, everything's pretty good.
So the team house is in New York.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so here's a question for you, because last time you were on the show, we made a big deal about the air conditioning and how like G2's in peak form in the team house with the AC on. Now we're getting to winter. Is that like an automatic buff? Like you just open the windows and it's like we're set. We don't need any temperature control at this point?
Exactly. Okay. Which is constant AC. I mean, it's 60 degrees. I mean, it's definitely a buff.
Okay. I wanted to make that clear because it seems like winter would be so now we know if G2 has like favorable results consistently in the winter, now we know why.
Oh yeah.
It's just the weather buff. Got it.
Well, I mean, history speaks for itself too, because last year we were facing relegation. We boot camped into a place with cold weather. We won, so
nice.
It's natural.
We have Jahzo here for the next hour or so. If you have any questions, please throw them in Twitch chat. I'm going to be collecting them. I'll probably ask a bunch of them throughout the show, honestly. People seem to like that in previous episodes when we have special guests. So if I see any interesting questions, I'll even just throw them in between topics. So feel free to just spam Twitch chat with all your questions, Jahzo, G2 related, whatever it is. Feel free to do so. As they come in, though, let's whip around the league. Let's talk about the end of the regular season in fall. And we will begin with just your overall thoughts. Now that the regular season is over, Jahzo, now that you've been through it, the amount of games and what you've seen in the change of format, how do you look back on the fall, on this new format?
So there's a couple things. I think this format has done a really good job of highlighting teams that have consistent performances. Obviously, if you look at both the grid and regionals, like seeding by points, you see that it's the same four teams in both, right? I think the manner in which teams were taking like all events seriously did kind of dip when we found out that the major at the end of split one was going to be online rather than offline. Mm-hmm. But you did see throughout the season different teams be more consistent, show up when it matters, show up when it didn't matter, all kinds of things, all kinds of results. And you really got to see the prime Rocket League, at least on NA side, because it's hard to pay attention to EU when you're not going to go up against them. That's when I'm really prime scouting. But yeah, I think the format, just the quantity of matches really showed which teams can be consistent throughout a long period of time, and that's definitely a benefit compared to the league play format. And I'm really impressed with how Rocket League as an esport has handled it.
Yeah, it's been like the broadcast. I mean, from my point of view, the broadcasts have been for a large part very seamless. Like other esports have had a myriad issues, right? And we've covered them here on ESPN Esports. But Rocket League, in large part, has been pretty smooth. The broadcasts have looked good. Yeah, you've had your glitches here and there, but it's not astronomical as compared to other esports. They really should be commended.
I think so too. Like they've done a really good job of being consistent with their streams and everything and the production. I think it's a real testament to how many hours of watch time Rocket League Esports has compared to previous months. Mm-hmm. I think we're at like an all-time high. And that's just purely because of how consistent they are and actually making the streams go well. They take cuts when they need to. Like for the past regional, they only streamed one match in the second part of stage 2 and stage 1. And that's them adapting to what's needed, adapting to the hours of talent, both players and casters alike. And I think it's just been really smooth. They've really streamlined how the actual operations behind the scenes work too. Just with bringing on DreamHack as a production team, it's been really good working with them as well. We've had barely any hiccups competitively as well.
What do you think about the amount of games for your players? Too high, too low, sweet spot? How are you feeling after playing through it one split?
It's a very stark difference. It'll be hard to tell if it's too much until probably we get through split 2. Because I think a lot of players are very taxed mentally at this point. But what is remain to be seen is whether or not it's too much. Because if they go into split 2 and there's constant burnout and even more mental turmoil, then obviously it's too much. In my mind, split 1 is a lot of mental fortitude practice, right? So if players can actually take the mental stress of split 1 and strengthen themselves for split 2, I think it's a good thing. I think we're at a perfect amount. However, if there are players that simply can't hang and can't handle how often they're going to be having to play this game, then I think it could be too much. But from a coach's point of view, it's strengthening them as players. So it's a good amount.
What are your biggest takeaways from the split? I mean, obviously you've had some grid victories, some impressive showings, whether it's rivalries, whether it's teams. What have been some of your big takeaways from this split for your team?
My biggest takeaway is that these teams that can come out of nowhere and perform, you really have to respect them. And as these lower teams are getting more experience because of just the quantity of games against these better teams or teams that people have regarded as very good teams in the past, such as NRG, Envy, SSG, us even, the more practice they get, the better they get and the more chance they have to do well. Like the prime example is KCP. Had a wonderful run. I think that's only possible because of how much experience they've been getting. So that's my prime takeaway is that these lower teams that maybe didn't thrive because they didn't have the practice against the good teams, they're actually getting that practice now. Second takeaway is...
Yeah, go ahead.
The second takeaway is the teams that are working to be the best are succeeding as well. It's clear in the top 4.
Yeah, and they're the ones that are managing the load the best, right? Like managing the workload and managing what is to come. Like we've seen instances of teams not able to bear it, whatever region it might be, with just the sheer amount of games. And it's almost as if, like in some cases, I don't want to use drama, that's an overhyped word, but like the challenges are almost put in fast forward because of how many games there are, whereas they may not have come to light as quickly if the schedule was more drawn out, right? Like whether it's concerns from players in a game or whether it's like it seems as though, like you said, like the top 4 teams are they're there because they're able to manage this a lot better.
It's very true. It's very true. Because you see these top 4 teams, they all have coaches and managers who are making sure they're putting in the work. They are disciplined in their actions so that they're not constantly bickering over small things. Like I know newly formed teams that are trying to get into the scene. For instance, like Frontline, teams like that, down to earth. They come in and they have a bad performance and they might jump to conclusions. They might start yelling at each other. Who knows what happens behind the scene? But up at the top, you have very disciplined mental states. You have people that aren't really bickering about certain people. They're bickering about actually playing the game properly, which I think is constructive communication among teams. Because if you can't openly talk about what's going right, what's going wrong, then you will crumble. And I think a lot of the newer teams are learning that.
We're getting a ton of questions. One of them was, can I come to the team house? Do you offer tours, Jahzo? Do you charge a fee?
Not as of now.
It's other teams being like, yeah, we'll come by, and then they like steal cords and stuff, or take a monitor. Yeah. Exactly. Hair Guy had a good question. Actually, this is a total sidebar before we get into this past week's results. When preparing for international opponents, does the whole team sit down and pitch like a class, or does Jahzo only come up with info and tell the team later? Like, what does that process look? I know that you won't necessarily have to do that this split, but how does that process look like when you're preparing for teams that you don't normally see all the time?
The process is pretty similar for almost any other improvements we're trying to make or matchups we're trying to look out for. Normally, everybody on the team has watched gameplay of whatever we're talking about, right? Whether we're talking about ourselves or looking at other teams, the guys on the team have probably seen some gameplay and have some thoughts. So what will happen normally is we'll just have a whole 4-man discussion. It's not just one person saying the end all be all of every single scenario and every single input is right or wrong. It's a whole team discussion. We're basically a 4-man roster when it comes to actually discussing how the game is to be played, how other teams are playing, what we can take from other teams, how we can abuse other teams and things like that. And it's especially true for EU. right? Because as you said it, this season we're not going to be able to play EU, so there's less focus on them, but we still do talk about what's happening over there. Like we still discuss how Vitality is playing, how BDS is playing. It's a little bit muted this time because, I mean, I think a lot of people aren't paying as much attention to EU, at least from NA, like you said. But at any point, it's just a four-man discussion. There's no one person's right about everything and brings all the information to the table. Everyone has their own stuff to contribute, and that's true for all aspects of the game and not just talking about EU.
So last time you were on this show, Jahzo, you had some extremely favorable things to say about EU. I mean, I couldn't believe how complimentary you were for every single player and every single team. The region as a whole, like I left that show thinking you were an EU superfan. So I do want to ask you, do you want to talk about EU this show? Are you okay if I ask you EU related questions?
If you're okay with talking about different colors and sizes of trash bins, sure.
I am okay with talking about different colors and sizes of trash bins. They come in a variety of sizes and colors. Red trash bins are lovely. So are green. And so are blue.
True. Some multicolored ones too.
Yes.
You got a little blue and red action up there at the top.
Sure. With some trim, white trim maybe.
Yeah, a little white trim.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we're on the same page here, yeah.
Yeah, got you. Okay, good to know. Actually, before we move on to, there is a good follow-up question from chat, and I am following along, chat. I'm trying to be as diligent as possible, collecting questions definitely for later as well. This one came up a few times, Jahzo, just the idea of, like you said, to follow up on your thought about how the second split will really dictate or show you how arduous the schedule is. How much will subs come into play? And how much will they become a viable option if and when we get to a point where the workload for the players on a weekly basis gets to be too much, especially in split 2 and 3? Like, how much of that are you thinking about already?
The substitute question is a very big one. And I don't think it's something that comes into play competitively, at least for another year or two. Right?
Okay.
So we've seen some teams actually have a lot of success, especially in North America, after dropping a starting player and moving them to the bench and bringing in their sub. In those cases, their subs are very compatible with those teams. And I think if you're looking for complete compatibility with subs, it's not that spread throughout the league, right? Like a lot of teams have good subs, but they're not always picking up these substitute players with the thought in mind that they're going to play. And I don't think a true like 4-man roster-esque substitute spot will come into play for another year or two. It's something I've thought about a lot because I think as we get playstyles that are more like thought out and set in stone, you could definitely have a substitute player to bring in and shake things up and change your own playstyle to counter other teams. But I don't think it's something that teams really think is worth it for a good bit.
Interesting. That's interesting. I wonder how that conversation is going to shape up, like you said, in the near and also distant future when we've had a lot of weeks of multiple games like this and the arduous preparations, etc. That's going to be an interesting one to follow along. Let's move on though. Let's go and whip around the league, talk about the Grid NA. Not the ideal result, of course. G2 bowing out in the quarterfinals to NRG. But boy, did you do it in style, Jahzo. You did it in style, bud. So to catch everybody up in case you're not aware, it was an all battle bus affair. Somehow, some way, both teams got together and said, you know what? Let's make it fun. Let's make it interesting. Let's give the fans a show. And we thank you for it. And everybody was in battle bus form, of course, with Llama Rama still happening in Rocket League. How'd that even come about? Like, who approached who? Whose idea was that?
It was kind of a mix. Okay. We as a team were talking as we qualified for top 8 on Tuesday, last Tuesday, that because we had basically already locked top 1 because SSG's forfeiture and us having so many points, that if we get a match that doesn't matter for anyone, like if we got a top 8 match that wasn't version 1, right? Because version 1 was fighting for a top 10 spot, so they don't relegate out of the grid, that we consider doing a battle bus game. And the ideal scenario was NRG because we knew they would be up for it. Obviously, Justin, Squishy, Garrett, the Good Sports, all had the battle bus, and we were talking to them beforehand. And we were like, if we get matched up, let's make this happen. Justin just instantly reacted like, let's do this. I want to do it. And as soon as we saw the bracket, we were like, we got NRG. Let's go. It's going to happen. And then we realized JNAPS Chicago didn't actually have the battle bus.
Great.
But then Devin,
Disaster.
Devin, a developer for Psionics, came in, clutched up with 2 minutes to spare, got them the battle bus, and we just had fun.
Who did that? Devin?
Devin, yep.
Oh, shout out to Devin.
Shout out Devin.
Round of applause for Devin in development. I love it. I love it. Came through in the clutch, giving us the battle bus matchup. Ah, that's great. Well, it was fun to watch.
Yeah, you could see in the VOD on Athena's watch party, you could see everybody in chat ripping each other up. You could see Justin saying Squishy was useless. So you could look at all the reactions to the goals. It was a good time.
Shout out to Athena, by the way. I've loved the grid broadcasts. So like, Lawler doing version 1 and some of the other casters that you regularly see doing other team streams during the grid. But people like Athena, when you have like community members like that, really getting involved, it's awesome. And I think that she's been the most entertaining, in my humble opinion, of the community streams on the grid, and it's definitely shown, and it's definitely popped off. So shout out to her and to G2 because you guys often make good content decisions. So notwithstanding, I mean, obviously you guys still secured the number 1 spot in the grid. That means you automatically, I guess not that it really matters in G2's case, but you guys qualify automatically for the major. I think you would have qualified anyway, right? Like, I don't know if that's...
Well, we got top 6, so we would have qualified by top 16 anyway since it's offline or online, right. And we would have qualified if it was offline anyways because we got top 6.
Yeah. So
my only question is I don't know how the grid affects the seeding just yet.
We are unsure about that as well, but nevertheless, NRG end up winning the whole thing. Where does NRG rank in G2's like specific competitive teams? Like when you look at the teams that you've faced in fall, had challenges with in fall, where does NRG rank on that list?
At least recently, they've been giving us the most trouble. SSG was up there, but they've kind of dropped out. Maybe it's just because we haven't played them as much, especially since they didn't play on Tuesday. Energy's up there. Like, there are teams that we know are going to be a tough match. There are teams that we know we have to focus on, like just a little step under, right? And NRG, NV, SSG, who I consider all to be top teams, are up there on our list of teams we should be afraid of. So NRG is like really high up there too, because they've had our number recently. But there's some other teams that like we just have to make sure we're watching out for. Like Peeps are always a good match. And then almost like KCP is kind of on the same vein. We're trying to figure out KCP's number, but we haven't been facing them as much recently. But then everybody else is like, we're pretty confident.
Since you agreed to talk about EU, let's go to the grid EU. So one thing we should mention is that there will be a tiebreaker because there are 2 teams tied for 10th. So what that means is they need to have a tiebreaker matchup. The winning team of that best of 7 will go into the winter grid automatically. The loser will have to go into the play-in or into the will have to go into the qualifier. So that's between Endpoint and Barcelona, and that will be a best of 7 playoff on October 10th. Which is an 8 p.m. CEST start time, and that will determine that. So in the grid this week, Giants Gaming, once again victorious. But how about that run? Team Liquid finally showing up somewhere. Like, it feels like they were one of the teams that we didn't talk much about, we didn't see much from. They were definitely underperforming by many people's standards. And now here they are, finally in a final. What did you make of that run?
I was both surprised and glad that Liquid finally stepped up. My bad. Team Liquid is a team like I had high hopes for at the beginning of Split 1. Obviously, like big names, Speed, Cuxer, Fruity, right? They've all had their moments in Rocket League Esports. I believe they've all won a major, if I'm not mistaken, before. So I expect a lot out of them. And to have them fall short a few times in the regionals and not do so hot in the grid, it was surprising. And when I was watching them play on Wednesday, I was like, this is the Liquid I've been missing. Where was this? My problem still with them was that they looked shaky, even though they were winning and doing well. I'm just looking at the B-roll here, and it's like
the highlights right here.
Yeah.
Against Dignitas, a team that definitely underperformed. And in fact, actually, I'm going to pull up the grid standings. I think they actually they have to go through the closed qualifier. They placed 14th. They got 200 points in fall. Yeah, we definitely didn't talk much about Dignitas this entire split. They
didn't say much themselves,
No, they didn't.
It's tough having these teams that you expect a lot out of that don't really show up. They don't have much to say, right? Obviously, Dignitas on their own right has their own issues, coming with a rookie and with Violent Panda's hand issues.
Yeah.
I wish it didn't have as big of an impact as it did for them specifically. At least they get some sort of excuse. I don't know what Liquid has to say about their performance throughout the entire split. But yeah, those like them two and Oxygen are the big three question marks of teams that you expect a lot out of that didn't say much.
So Oxygen end up with 3rd in grid points. And they're also a team, like, I feel like even though, like, that's a high number it seems like a high number for them. Because I guess I felt like I expected more from Oxygen this split. Like, I feel like they are in the underperforming category overall this split. Even though they're 3rd in the grid results. I feel like they could have done better in many results. They did get 2nd in week 5. But otherwise, it's a litany of didn't make the playoffs, quarterfinal exits, and a couple of semifinal and one final appearance. Or sorry, 2 final appearances.
And those 2 finals appearances were early too.
Yeah, my bad. It's 3. Week 1, week 4, and week 5. They came in 2nd. So they had some decent appearances there, but it wasn't consistent though. Like they would fizzle out of the playoffs, or they would have these head-scratching losses against teams that weren't in the top 10 or something like that. Like it just seemed very odd.
My problem with Oxygen is they didn't seem connected to each other. They in the offseason, they took an opportunity to drop the person that was making them speak English in comms, and they picked up Astral, who's Belgian but speaks French. And in my mind, the opportunity to have a full French, like speaking comms, that should have had them elevate higher, but I still think something's disconnected. Like they're not on the same page because they're all really gifted, right? Farah is very strategical, has very good decision making. Might not be the best mechanically, considered the Airbus of Rocket League sometimes.
Okay.
But you have Shawset and Astro who are mechanical geniuses, but somehow with all of the tools in their arsenal, they can't clutch out wins. It's very confusing.
So those are the grid performances. Of course, we're at the end of the regular season, and that also means that the last regional in NA has concluded. Team Envy are victorious against Kansas City Pioneers. It feels like this was something that was bound to happen based on their results. They were a little inconsistent at times throughout this split as well, Jahzo, but it's almost nice to see them in a final like this because they've been working hard this split, right? Like have you, other than playing them professionally, have you scrimmed with them a lot? Do you talk with them? Like what do you make of this performance in the regional?
Which team? Envy or KCP?
The KCP.
KCP have really grown into their own right. Like we weren't streaming them. I'll be open about this. We weren't streaming them a bunch at the beginning, but as soon as they started stepping up and proving to be an issue when we were playing them competitively, we needed to get more experience against them. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, where we're trying to get their number, and that's purely based off of actual competitive experience against them. For their own grind, they've done a really good job of actually practicing, putting in the work. We've seen Rapid and Memory, right? Rapid, Memory, Beast Mode. We've seen Rapid Memory before. Memory's been around the league for a long time. Rapid's been around in name, mostly. But Beast Mode has really elevated that team a lot. Like, Beast Mode is the one you talk about when you talk about KCP. I mean, even other players, when they've talked in interviews on the RLCS broadcast, they've talked about Beast Mode specifically. And his ability to just always be in the air, always ready to challenge. And it's just his mental game is so strong. as well as his mechanical game. That I think he's done a really good job of elevating that team to a team that's competing for a top 6 spot, top 5, top 4, but definitely top 6. And I think it's very impressive by Beast Mode because he's a rookie, he's young, and it's this classic story of these young people coming in and shaking up the scene. And if I'm being honest, this could be another moment similar to Justin after season 4 of RLCS. I don't know if people here have memories of that, but Justin came on. It joined RLCS with a lower team with 2 players that might not have been up to his level. And he actually joined a team that was considered top of the league, but was still dropping a player. And then they ended up doing really well for a long time. And that was when he joined NRG, replacing Jacob. Mm-hmm. And then Justin just kind of flourished. I wouldn't be surprised if after the major, if a team picked up Beast Mode outside of or inside the top 4. I wouldn't be surprised.
It was such an exciting series too. Like, speaking of Beast Mode, he had some great moments in that series. And it was almost heartbreaking, like not taking sides, looking at it objectively, it was still heartbreaking to see how KCP lost this one, right? Like, game 7, ball in the air, time expired, ball stays in the air for like 8 to 10 seconds. And then Envy just a perfect pass to the front of the net, streaking player, back of the net, it's over. Like, it's like, man, that's a heartbreaker. Like, if you are a neutral fan watching that, you would be excused if you suddenly became a KCP fan as the series progressed, because they got through 2 overtimes to tie the series. They were down 3-1, and then to lose like that in game 7, that's heartbreaking.
It is, but it's also foundation building, because the most important time for your defense to be on point is at 0 seconds. We've been through this before, like as a team, G2. Season 7 finals, we got 0-second gold. And that is the most important time for your communication to be as on point as possible. And I think it's foundation building for KCP, because I think one of their main issues is nerves. And I think for a while there, they were riding on a high of having a lot of success. And now that that series was taken from them by a moment where they could have done a lot better, it's just testament for them that practice and mental fortitude is important. And I think with even more practice, you could see KCP staying at the top for a bit. Because I was wary of them last time we talked. Because they were just getting some results. If you remember on the last show I was on, They had just beat us, I believe, in like a stage 1. And they were kind of on the rise. And I was wary because I was like, well, there's probably going to be other teams that have a similar outcome where they're on the bubble and they kind of rise because of how much experience they're getting. But KCP has really proven to me that they can be there. And I think that this is Rocket League moment is a very defining moment in a team's career. It's a turning point, so to speak.
So with that said, that's a very good point and an interesting one, because now with this loss in that fashion, the honeymoon phase is over. Right? Like in a sense, in the sense that now we've gone through that. Okay, we're proverbially the new kids on the block, so to speak, at least competing at this level, competing like this in our LCSX. We're not in the top 4 of the best teams, but we're knocking on the door and we're making waves aside from the teams we normally talk about in Rocket League. But now we make this regional final, we lose in this fashion. So is it now that you look at them and say, okay, well, now let's see what you do in the next split. Let's see if you can keep this up without that with the honeymoon phase being over, with that sort of like rose-colored glasses being off now. Like this is the time for them to step up, right?
Yeah, because like I said earlier, consistency is definitely the highlight of the new format. If they can't take this performance into split 2, then they don't deserve a spot at Worlds. And that's what everyone's end goal should be right now, is looking towards Worlds. Like, that's all we're talking about. We're not really considering the major. We're looking at our overall points, and we're looking at Worlds. And I think at this point, KCP has elevated themselves from a team looking at making regionals consistently and making qualifying for the major to now they should have a long-term goal. And their practice focus should be consistency. And that's the elevation that you're talking about. When you go from staring at the door 10 feet away to knocking on the door, that's when you should start looking at the long term. And that is the point when you are considered up there. So it's time for them.
To be fair to them as well, it seems when you look at their results, it looks like they're consistently improving. So at least there's a precedent there that, like, from the beginning of the year, like you said, you were weary about them to now, it seems like they're steadily building blocks like this. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the winter, like you said. Let's turn our attention to your team, though. Definitely not the result that you would have wanted, but how do you look back on it? Like, what are your biggest takeaways from another semifinal? It seems like, you see the familiar faces yet again, G2 getting to the semifinals once again. Not what you wanted against Envy, but like, what were your big takeaways from the tournament for your team?
Well, we finally made it past the quarterfinal. So that was definitely confidence boosting. There was a struggle in regionals 1 and 2 of only making top 8. The real takeaway is that you really have to be wary of the other teams in the top 4, right? As soon as you make it to the semifinal, you're not going to have an easy match. It's going to be difficult, especially with the consistency of seeding, right? SSG realized that when they played SSG or KCP on the other side. Specifically, we saw who was in our side of the bracket, and we knew even if we were going to beat Peeps, who was probably, well, they were the lowest ranked seed on our side of our side of the bracket, right? But we knew that it was going to be a tough match going into the semifinals, and it was Envy. There was a little bit of confidence because we had just beaten them the day before in stage 2. My takeaway from that is, like, we can't really consider that an overall loss, because if you look at the record over 2 days, we 3-1 to Envy and then they 4-2 to us. That puts us even in games overall. That's 5-5 over 2 days. Like, that's just testament to how even and skilled these teams are at the top. And understanding that we qualified for the major, even if it was going to be top 6 only, that was a big takeaway. Making sure we weren't getting down on ourselves. We still have a chance to prove ourselves and grind as hard as we can for the major. We just get more experience in this format. We've had more matches in this regional than in the other, obviously, because we made it one series further. And I think we'll just keep improving from there.
So you, like you said, definitely qualified for the major. So the first North American major, the fall major, I should say, begins on October 18th, goes until October 25th. Another team that is qualified among the many are Pittsburgh Knights, and our very own Sleegy, who you very much enjoy his interviews here on Behind the Wheel, had a chance to catch up with their coach, Mclando. Let's hear Sleegy talk with Lando in an interview with the Pittsburgh Knights coach.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another ESPN Esports interview. My name is Sleegy, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mclando. He is the coach of the Pittsburgh Knights, an RLCS team in North America. And Mclando, first and foremost, how are you doing today?
It's a great day. I mean, we got RLCS qualifiers later today, actually. So,
oh, really?
Gotta burst on over to there after this. But hey, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, we're excited to have you. And, you know, with all that on the horizon, I'll just go ahead and jump straight into things. And, you know, the first thing I kind of wanted to touch on with you is, you know, you've been a coach of 3 prior RLRS teams in Monkey Business, Stromboli, and then also most recently Valence before they were picked up by now the Pittsburgh Knights. How has that transition from RLRS to RLCS been for you, especially now with you being under a more established organization?
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, those 3 teams were all pretty much in almost one season. I mean, we went from a regular season with Monkey Business to promotional with Stromboli to off season with Valence. So I learned a lot about how teams kind of operate just from all these perspectives. I mean, you got 3 main guys on every roster, so I got 9 really solid perspectives from everybody. But the transition from RLRS to RLCS is substantial.
Yeah, I imagine there's probably a lot more moving parts, especially with everything that comes with the organization. And, you know, speaking of that, we've seen some pretty middle of the pack results from the team so far. And, you know, with that, would you say that you're happy with the performance up to this point or not really?
Well, you got to look at it as the grand picture, right? From last season, the Knights would have been absolute leverage, which would have been power ranked 14th. You know, that's not the most ideal spot, but in RLRS, that's amazing. You know, you made top 4 for RLRS, kind of a minor league system, but now you get to go with the pros. So getting to a spot where we're kind of considered around 8th, I mean, we're on the rise is what I'll say.
Yeah, and with that, would you say that org expectations play into your answer there, or is it more just what you're expecting to see out of this team?
I definitely put more personal expectations on myself than any org expectations put on me. I want to win. I always want to get better than before, and we're in a opportunity where that's almost a weekly thing that you can kind of prove that. Where before it was, an entire season. So it's really different now because each week you can go in and kind of show your progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And you speaking of that weekly progress that you're able to show, there's a lot of new games, or not new games, but more games in general that teams play over this new format. And one of the things I was also curious to ask you about is, from your perspective, sort of as a coach, just what are your thoughts in general of this new format, the amount of games that are being played, and just the sheer number of teams that are competing right now?
I mean, this new format is just something miraculous. I mean, you have so many game fives with teams that are just neck and neck skill level. I mean, it is just down to the wire who's going to be better that day, and it just comes down to so much preparation. It allows teams to really work for something and show their progress. So I love this new format just entirely. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely allows teams to either, if they have a good start, to try and maintain it, and they have a bad start, maybe work on getting it back without it being as brutal as the last format. But
hmm
with that, is there anything that you would potentially change about this format if you had the ability to just sit there and be like, I want this here and that over there and this?
Mm, as far as changes go, I mean, there's still experimentation. The grid has been an interesting experience just because that's a lot of teams from last season that are kind of competing together. It's more so just scheduling than anything. I mean, it's nothing like too crazy. It's just making sure that everything is kind of at a certain time in a certain location, just to have it more consistent. But all in all, I mean, the format's just amazing.
Yeah, I imagine. And, with the format as well, we're talking on Wednesday. It's September 30th when we're speaking now. And so
Mhm.
there is that regional on the rise. It's regional number 3 for North America. It's going to be really important leading up to this major upcoming. And another thing, again, since you're the coach, how do you personally go about preparing the team with such an important event on the horizon to get them fully ready for everything that's going to go down?
Well, it's tough because maybe I should have talked about this more when I had complaints about the event, but we don't know who we play most of the day until it happens. I mean, you have stage one of RLCS, you know who your first opponent is, and it's kind of, however it goes after that. You got to be ready to play literally anybody. The big transition from before was that you'd have an entire week to prepare for a team, and now you have, hours to prepare for about 5 of them. It's crazy. It's a big transition. So, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
And with that, would you say that you still sort of focus on individual teams, or now with it being more unknown of who you're playing each week, is it just trying to focus on the Pittsburgh Knights, and then whoever they come across, you're just going to try and use the same game plan with them?
Without throwing all of my secrets into the mix,
Yeah, yeah.
there's game plans for every team, and you just got to get ready for whoever you're going to play. And you have that little bit of time between series to kind of discuss and be like, all right, guys, we've played these guys before. This is what we remember. We have replays. We can go over them. We can really just like solidify how we're going to play because we only have 5 games.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final thing I'm going to touch on with you today is, you
Mhm.
mentioned, going over replays, having game plans with those teams. And I'm assuming that that means you're paying close attention to pretty much all the competition that you could potentially be going up against. And just for fun, I'm curious, in your mind, who you see as the most underrated team right now in North America. And then also, on the flip side of that coin, who you think is the most overrated team in North America.
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble. Um, I think an underrated team is probably one that goes under the radar for sure. You might have heard of them, Team Frontline.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They have given more trouble to more of these teams than I've ever seen, and they're not even in the grid right now. I mean, they're a team that's up and coming and just slaying. I mean, they're doing everything just perfectly right, and I see them doing really well in the future.
Yeah, I mean, especially with all the opportunities they have. It's actually one, I had a couple of ideas of who I thought you might say, but I didn't consider Frontline. But I mean, that's actually a really good shout, because if they can kind of continue on the trajectory they're at, they can achieve some good things. But yeah, like I said as well, on the flip side of that, who's a team that maybe you think might be a little overrated right now?
I'm just gonna take a stab at the big four right now. I think that Envy's got some problems that need to be fixed. They definitely can, but out of the big four, I'd say they're the least solid currently. They're obviously a tremendous team. They're up at the top, but for people that are trying to break into that top 4, they're the ones that are kind of getting targeted.
I can see that, though. I think even throughout the success that they've been seeing so far, even they would be willing to admit that there's been some, we'll call them speed bumps, I guess,
Yeah.
along the way. But again, with this regional number 3, it's very possible that the Pittsburgh Knights get to play Envy, maybe an opportunity for Pittsburgh to get a big win and move farther along. We've seen pretty good results from y'all in the regionals. You make it all the way to the quarterfinals in the first one. You at least make it into stage 2 of regional number 2. So I'm really excited to see how you guys play, especially now with the grid behind us for this first split. And I'm excited just to see how it all ends.
I see some great things happening, but with this last regional and the major, we got about 60% of the circuit points for split 1 still up for grabs. So anybody can do anything at this point, and I don't know. I just love the format, so I'll just say it up and down. I love it. Anything can happen. So it's those who work hard that get the reward.
Get the reward indeed. Well, we'll see if you and the Pittsburgh Knights can get the rewards this weekend. Thank you so much for sitting down with me again, Mclando. It's been a pleasure talking to you and sort of picking your brain a little bit from a coach's perspective. And again, to everyone watching, we try and do this every week if we can. So if you have any ideas of people you potentially want us to talk to, whether it be coaches, managers, players, whoever, let us know. What do you want to know from them? And we'll try and make sure that we get that to you. But for this one, that is going to do it for us. Again, my name's been Sleeky. With me has been Mclando. And thank you all so much for watching.
Thank you to Mclando for joining us, joining Sleegy, I should say, and that full interview will be available on our YouTube channel /ESPN Esports. And Sleegy regularly brings us interviews here on Behind the Wheel. What we also bring you regularly is our power rankings. And that means our buddy Jahzo over there has put together a top 5 list and a top 10 list for one region. It was definitely EU. Let's talk about... Actually, you did a top 20 for us in EU, Jahzo. Why don't we start with number 20? Why did you pick... I'm just kidding. You did a top 5 for us in EU, did a top 10 for us in NA. Let's start with EU, though. You had told us that this was a much shorter conversation than NA. So let's go through your top 5 from EU. How do you want to do this? Do you want to just go 5, 4, 3? Do you want to just do them all at once, or do you want to go one by one?
You lead me, Arda.
Okay, well, let's just do them one by one and see how far we get. Number 5 in EU.
Top blokes.
Why?
Because I don't think they're material for top 4, but I think they have enough competitive results that puts them knocking on the same door that KCP is in NA.
Do you need to see more from them? Like, I feel like they are the team in EU that people talk about the most in terms of potential this and Archie that, and there's like, this is the team, watch out for them. They can compete in the top 5. Like, have you not seen enough from them?
I haven't. I've seen enough from Archie. Archie's great, but the rest, they're solid, but some more breakout performances. Maybe less trash can and more recycle bin. You know what I mean?
Got you. Okay, so they're on the border here, according to you, right? So like they're still trash can, but they're gonna move towards recycle bin. A little bit. They need to be a little bit more earth conscious, is what you're saying. Maybe separate the plastics with the papers.
A little bit more focused on what they're doing, so to speak.
Got it. Okay. Understood. Where when you watch a player like Archie play, right? Like, where would you rank him in terms of like individual potential? Because like that's all I ever hear whenever anyone talks about Archie. Potential. The sky's the limit for this guy. Like, what about from your lens? What are you seeing from him?
Seeing as he makes a team what they are, I put him top 10 in EU.
Wow.
As a player, yeah. Because you have a lot of talent on the other top 4 teams, but he's got some talent. He definitely has potential. So top 10 for me as an individual player.
Top Blokes did not make the playoffs in week 9 of the grid. They fell to Barcelona. Let's move on. In our Barcelona, spoiler alert, is not in Jahzo's top 5. So there you go. For all you Barca fans out there, and I know there's always like 1 or 2 of you in the chat. Barcelona, not in the top 5. Still clinging on to their good lives, however. We talked about that earlier. Who's number 4?
Guild.
Guild Esports. They've had some decent results. What makes them number 4, though?
Number 4 is I think they have the potential to go higher. However, their lack of results in the first half of the split were very lackluster. They were having some struggles, maybe inter-team struggles, maybe just competitive struggles. Who knows? I'm not their coach. I see the potential in their roster, though, right? You have 3 very good players. Scrub, obviously, trying to be as anchor as possible. It's similar to the last time I was on. Guild is a team that beats everyone below them, and maybe not everyone, but most of the time beats everyone below them, and struggles against the teams above them. Struggles against the 3 unnamed teams that you know that we're about to say.
So, okay, before we talk about those unnamed teams, they are very consistent. Just to add to your point, Guild Esports are extremely consistent at making the quarterfinals.
Yes, I hard agree.
So,
and they're also very consistent at losing to the teams in the
yes,
quarterfinals.
They are very wildly consistent at losing to teams in the quarterfinals. So they're able to make them. They're not able consistently or regularly, or in fact, when you look at their results, only once in week 8 did they make the finals of a grid. Also a regional. So like from what you can see, Jahzo, like why are they struggling to get past this mark? Why is that such a roadblock for them?
Almost as if there's a lack of effort. I see moments of brilliance that could really elevate them if they were consistent moments of brilliance. And I think it's either lack of motivation or a lack of communication or just a lack of effort, maybe, that is stopping them from turning those moments into consistent play. Because I see their potential because they realize their potential, but not very frequently. Like you see their matchups in the playoffs, you see who they lose to. It makes sense because those teams end up going far pretty consistently. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I ended up putting them where they are in my power rankings. Because I look at their results, I see their matchups, and they're pretty good up until you get to a certain few teams. And then it's consistently losing to them is my issue with them.
I think people can guess who are in your top 3, but we would love to know how you ordered them. Who's number 3?
I have Giants.
Giants at number 3. So they came in first in the grid week 9, and they've been all over the place this split. They've had some good results. They've also fizzled out at inopportune times. Not the greatest results from a regional perspective, but still impressive at times. So what kept them at number 3 for you, or put them in the top 3 for you?
Their frequency of skill. They a lot more often than other teams show that they're good and they can play the game properly.